Hey crew, it's Bid, and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mr. Rudolph Steiner. This is an outline of occult science. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link from my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we're going to dive in and continue our exploration where we left off yesterday, which was part of the way through the chapter and not even really halfway. So there is quite a bit ahead of us. I don't know if we will get through all of it today. I do want to take just a minute here at the beginning for those of you who actually watch, who have been here for a while, and let you know some of the things that are unfolding real quick. We are about done with the exploration of other people's works dealing with magical things. There has not been a whole lot of things that are necessarily good in any of these particular studies, and so it is almost time to move on. We have a couple more that we are going to do just to make sure that we get it knocked out and in the correct way. We're going to finish up this Rudolph Steiner, and then next, the only real reference for magic left to really dive into is dealing with the current situation, and that is going to be Aleister Crowley. We will be doing book 4 of his, Liber 4, and there is a possibility that we'll do book 7 depending on how book 4 goes. But that's probably going to be the end of the esoterica end of this. I am looking at starting a podcast. You know who I'm looking at now. I have already at least 2 people who are probably interested. One for sure. The other one I haven't reached out to, but I'm sure he's interested as well. And both of y'all watch these videos, so you both know who you are. To discuss these things with other people so that there is more of an interaction. Working out the actual mechanics of that, right? It's got to wait until after this because I only have so much voice to go around. And by the end of the day, my voice is really quite dead. And most people have their time at the end of the day. I'm open during the entire day, right? I can talk early in the morning, I can talk late at night, but I have to choose my battles because of the strengthening in my throat that's still taking place. All of this just to say that there will be a pivot soon, but it's not today. It's not going to be right now. We are going to finish Steiner, even though there is, not as much here as I had hoped that there would be. It does appear that there is more to extrapolate upon in Liber 4, but again, the Crowley got a lot of things wrong too. There's a lot of ceremonial magic in there, and you know how I stand on ceremonial magic. I do not know whether we will be doing a Kabbalah understanding, right? It is a possibility, and if the crew reaches out to me with a want for that, that is something that we will do. But probably after this, I will still be doing readings and studies, but it will be less esoterica. We will start doing some Jungian things. We will start with Mysterium Conjunctionis, which is his dealing with the esoteric, Carl Jung's esoteric writing, and that's probably where we'll start diving into Jung. And all of that just to let you know what's coming up. I know not everybody is interested, but I didn't want to do a whole different video for it, and the people who would be interested are going to watch this video. Now, with all of that being said, we're going to pick up where we left off. This is the chapter dealing with death and sleep, and we just dealt with sleep. This next part appears to deal with death. That's why we cut it off yesterday. There is still like 40 pages of this left to go, and that is quite a ways. And so it is extremely unlikely that we will make it all the way through this chapter today. Like the next chapter is like 200 and something pages. So we will definitely be taking some time with that. If I get to a point where it appears to be a natural stopping place, we will stop. I will try to make it around an hour because that is consumable for most people. Now, back to the text. Even death takes place for no other cause than a change in the connection of the principles of man's being. And what is visible to clairvoyant observation with regard to death may also be seen in its effects in the manifested world. In this case also, an unbiased judgment will find the teachings of occult science confirmed by observing external life. The expression of the invisible in the visible is, however, less evident with regard to these facts, and there is a greater difficulty in feeling the full importance of that which, in the events of outer life, endorses the statements of occult science in this domain. These statements may be supposed to be mere pictures of fancy, even more readily than many other things that have been dealt with in this work. If we shut ourselves off from the knowledge that everywhere in the visible is contained an unmistakable foreshadowing of the invisible. On the approach of sleep, only the astral body is released from its connection with the etheric and physical bodies, which still remain united, whereas at death, the separation of the physical from the etheric body takes place. The physical body is abandoned to its own forces and must, therefore, disintegrate as a corpse. At death, the etheric body finds itself in a condition in which it has never been before during that time between birth and death, with the exception of certain abnormal conditions to be dealt with later. That is to say, it is now united with the astral body in the absence of the physical body, for the etheric and astral bodies do not separate immediately after death. They are held together for a time by the agency of a force, the presence of which can be easily understood. For were this force not present, the etheric body could not detach itself from the physical body. It would remain bound to the latter, as is shown in the case of sleep, when the astral body is not able to render asunder these two principles of man's being. I am not going to bother going through and reaffirming again that I don't believe in these bodies, right? I do believe that there is an extra physical thing, that there is the soul. The soul is not the physical. There is another existence. I just don't necessarily agree with the way that he breaks it down. I do not agree. I'm not in accordance that these things are necessities, that these things are actually what happens. It is entirely possible, but it is only possible. There is no way to be definitive on it. This force comes into action at death. It releases the etheric from the physical body so that the former remains united to the astral body. Clairvoyant observation shows that this connection varies with different people after death. The time of its duration is measured by days. For the present, this period of time is mentioned only for the sake of information. Subsequently, the astral body is also released from the etheric body and goes on its way alone. During the union of the two bodies, the individual is in a state which enables him to be aware of the experiences of his astral body. As long as the physical body is there, the work of reinforcing the wasted organs has to be begun from without, as soon as the astral body is liberated from it. When once the physical body is separated, this work ceases. Nevertheless, the force which was expended in this way while the man was asleep continues after death and can now be applied to some other end. It is now used for making the astral body's own experiences perceptible. During his connection with this physical body, the outer world enters man's consciousness in images. After the body has been laid aside, that which is experienced by the astral body, when it is no longer connected with sense organs, with this outer physical world, becomes perceptible. At first, it has no new experiences. In connection with the etheric body, prevents it from experiencing anything new. What, however, it does possess is memory of its past life. The etheric body is still being present causes that past life to appear as a vivid and comprehensive panorama. That is man's first experience after death. He sees his life from birth to death spread out before him in a series of pictures. Memory is only present in the waking state, when during life man is united with his physical body, and it is present only to the extent allowed by that body. Nothing is lost to the soul that has made an impression on it during life. Were the physical body a perfect instrument for the purpose, it would be possible at any moment during life to conjure up the whole of the past before the eyes of the soul. At death, there is no longer any obstacle to this. As long as the etheric body remains, there exists a certain degree of perfection of memory. But this disappears according to the degree in which the etheric body loses the form which it possessed while united with the physical body, and which resembles that body. This is the very reason why the astral body separates, after a time, from the etheric body. It can remain united with the latter only so long as the form of the etheric body corresponds with that of the physical body. During the period of life between birth and death, separation of the etheric body occurs only in exceptional cases, and for no longer than a brief space of time. If, for example, a man exposes one of his limbs to pressure, part of his etheric body may become separated from the physical one. We say on such occasion that the limb has gone to sleep, and the particular sensation we feel results from the separation of the etheric body. No, it comes because there is no blood flow in that particular area, and therefore your nerves cannot transmit the feelings and sensations that they have. They do go to sleep, but they are not separated. Right? It is not a physical separation. It is not a spiritual separation. It is simply a misappropriation of the fluidics in your body, right? If there is no blood flow, then it does go numb. That is true. But it is not because the etheric body has been separated. That is not true. Of course, a materialistic manner of explanation may here again deny the invisible behind the visible and say, all this arises merely from the physical disturbance caused by the pressure. Yes, that is true, right? And I do not take a merely materialistic view of things, right? If you think that I am looking at things entirely materialistic, you have not been following along at all, right? I do believe in exceptional things when there is a reason to believe that there is an exceptional cause, right? Miracles do happen. The healing in my throat, the fact that I can talk to you right now, that is due to extrasensory things. That was me directing the energies and the way that I instruct you in this book to help myself to heal in very real ways. That is extrasensory, right? That is not the physical material, right? That is something a little bit more. I am fully immersed into something a little bit more, but it has to be appropriate. This is not an appropriate application of that, right? A better application of that is phantom limb syndrome, whereas the arm gets physically cut off and your etheric body remembers the arm and causes pain in the arm that is no longer there. That is a much better explanation of this than I laid on my arm and it went to sleep. This is just trying to read something in there that is not necessarily there, and I'm not a big one for self-insertion. Clairvoyant vision can see in such a case how the corresponding part of the etheric body extends beyond the physical limb. That right there is exactly what I am talking about reading into what you want. The problem with clairvoyance is that. It is one of the problems with prophecy. We talk about the problems with prophecy a lot because there are a lot of problems with prophecy. But one of the main ones is that you can only interpret prophecy according to what you already know. If you were to put Isaiah right here next to me, he would not be able to accurately describe the things in this room. He could tell you about a wall. He might be able to understand about the window, but there is glass there. He might not get that, right? The carpet, maybe. There were rugs. But the television, no. It is a glowing rock that talks to people, right? This camera, no. No understanding whatsoever. It is a divine God recording people so that they can be seen on the talking rock. But if he is here for a year and the language barrier is not a problem, I can teach him all of these things. He can have an understanding of what the TV is, what the microphone is, what the camera is, these ever-glowing lights that we have. He could understand all of that, but he can't in his current existence because he does not have the understanding of technology. You can only interpret according to what you know. So if Isaiah was having a prophecy, say, of the end times, maybe he is misinterpreting some of the things because he does not understand those things that he sees. You have the same problem with clairvoyance. I do not deny that clairvoyance is a thing. It is entirely possible, well within the realm of possibility to me. I do not have experience with intentionally going and looking at things, but other people have, and some of them are fairly reliable, but some of them are not. The problem being is that the separation between those two things is highly subjective in many cases. And if you are looking as a clairvoyant, as somebody putting their arm to sleep, trying to find an explanation that fits into your belief system that you already have, then the vision that you see is almost certainly going to confirm your bias. Confirmation bias is a thing, and we do look for the things that confirm what we already believe. I try to acknowledge that as much as possible in these videos. Right? If I relay something, like I see something that is explaining in the same way that I do, I will say confirmation bias acknowledged. Right? This is something that I already believe and I want to believe, and so I am seeing this as a confirmation. If you are going into a clairvoyant exercise with the absolute understanding of what is going to unfold, well, that is exactly what is going to unfold. Now, I don't have this problem because if I was engaged in clairvoyant activities, anything I saw is outside of my control. I cannot do it for myself. Aphantasia is a real thing. And so, for me, that is a much easier step. And if somebody is a clairvoyant with aphantasia, I am going to be more likely to believe them, right? But you can't prove aphantasia, right? I can never convince somebody who is skeptical that it is a thing, that it is a real thing. And some people believe that just because I cannot envision in my mind, I don't have the ability to imagine. Looking at you, Tim Pool, right? I do have the ability to conceptualize. I have written 2 books. I have a video game that I'm working on, several different works of art that I have done for myself. I have that ability, right? I do have the ability to cognize, even if I don't have the ability to visualize. And so the problem with this is that clairvoyants see what they want to see some of the time. Edgar Casey is a very good explanatory for that. The Emerald Tablets of Teote that everybody believes is underneath the Sphinx in the secret chamber, the entirety of that belief comes from Edgar Casey having a clairvoyant vision. Like, that is the only reason anybody believes that at all. As far as I am aware, there is not even another rumor that started it, right? It is simply Casey said that he saw these things. Well, Casey saw some things, and many of them were true. Casey also saw some things that were absolutely not true, and provably so. And so, take it with a grain of salt. Anything that is entirely personal is not going to be provable, right? My belief in God, I cannot prove to you. I can give you evidences that I believe have led me to the path, right? The healing of my throat, my shoulder, my back, and my leg. I believe that proves to me that there's God, but I can't give you my experience of these things being healed in me. You don't even have to believe that they actually happened, right? I don't have a medical doctor here saying, yes, this thing happened, right? I have my testimony that this thing happened. Take it with a grain of salt. Never take anything that I say of a personal nature as a fact, right? The same with clairvoyance. Take it with a grain of salt. It may be true, but make sure. Trust and verify. Back to the text. Now, if a man experiences an unusual shock or something similar, such as separation of the etheric body from a large part of the physical body may result for a short time. This is something that I can talk about. I have had out-of-body experiences. They may have been near death, but there was no angel in that particular time. The first one I was like 6, 7 years old, which 7 and 8 it would be the set the patterns, and so it is entirely possible I was as old as 8, but I'm pretty sure I was in 2nd grade. That would have been 7. And I was at the park, and we had a slide, and it was a really, really tall slide. And I wanted to slide, and this other guy wanted to slide, and he pushed me off of the slide. And I landed directly on my ass. Like, directly. And my spine did things that may have caused the narrowing of the spinal column that I have now. May have been from this traumatic event in my life. And so I was separated from myself. I was knocked slap out of my body. I was observing myself. I was outside of myself as a child, looking at me crying. My body was crying. I was not in it. I didn't have the sensations at all. There was no pain. There was a sound. It was remarkably like a name that I got later. But this was a state of me being outside of myself. That is something that happened to me, and I can relay it to you, but you don't have to believe me. It happened to me again when I was in the Navy. I didn't hear him say that they were firing the 54s, and so I walked out on deck. If you are unaware, the 5-inch 54 caliber guns that we have on the Navy cruisers pack a hell of a punch. And now I'm not even talking about the shell hitting you. When they fire off, the concussion is enough to cause problems. Well, we have these dogs, right? There's this whole lever that you use to open the doors. And I undogged the door and I went to open it, and I got it about 4 to 5 inches. And the 5-inch 54 shot off as boom. And that door said bam. And it knocked me 15 feet back into a bulkhead. And once again, I was separated from my body. Both of those times, I was outside of myself, viewing myself. And again, I do not have the capacity to do that voluntarily at all. These are things that have happened to me, and it leads me to believe that this might be true. Now, I made a decision to reinsert myself into the body. I remember making the decision both times. I remember the physical sensation of re-entering the body, which implies a whole different level of understanding. These are experiences that I have had, and I cannot give you my experience. I can only relay them to you. But it is in direct accordance with this, right? There was a sudden shock that resulted in the separation of me from me. Now, whether that is an etheric body or a soul, that's up for debate, right? The terminology, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you are doing technical discussions, yes, absolutely. Technical definitions do matter, right? But in this particular case, it doesn't matter if I call it a soul and he calls it an etheric body. The understanding is the same. And I just wanted to relay that because that absolutely is relevant to this. And it is a confirmation from an outside source, because I am an outside source to him, right? And this is an outside source confirming my experience to me. Back to the text. That is the case when a man, for some reason or another, is suddenly brought face to face with death. For example, when drowning, or threatened by a fatal accident while mountaineering. What is related by people who have had such experiences comes, in fact, very near the truth, and can be ratified by a clairvoyant observation. They declare that in such moments their whole lives pass before their minds as though in a huge memory picture. Out of the many examples which might here be adduced, allusion will be made only to one, because it originates from a man whose mode of thought would make everything said about such things seem pure fancy. We are going to check out this footnote. As a matter of fact, it is always very profitable for anyone who is taking up the study of occult science to acquaint himself with the statements of those who regard this science as merely fanciful. Such statements cannot be so easily branded as due to partiality on the part of the observer. Let occultists learn as much as possible from those who regard their efforts as nonsense. They need not be disturbed if, in this respect, their love is not reciprocated. Occult observation assuredly does not require such things for the verification of its results, nor are these illusions intended as proofs, but as illustrations. And that is a reiteration of what I've been saying, right? I can give you the experience, or I can tell you the experience. I can't give it to you. Many people will not believe what you relay. That doesn't mean that it is not true. Many people will relay the information to you that may not correspond. that is something that you should always take into account. The speculation side of this is always a thing. The psychosomatic effects are real, right? The placebo effect is a thing. You can convince yourself that something is true if it is not. That is why I tell you so often that although I have written a book definitively stating some things, I even couch that in speculation. And if you have proofs that I am wrong, I am willing to adjust. And that is something that you should always do. And you cannot adjust if you refuse to accept that there may be information that you do not have. You should always foster this sense of learning, the sense of understanding, even if it is something you're pretty emphatic about. Maurice Benedict, the distinguished criminal anthropologist and eminent investigator in many other realms of natural science, relates in his reminiscences an experience of his own, to the effect that once, when on the point of drowning in a bath, he had seen his whole life pass before his memory as though in a single picture. Other people have described the same thing. If other people describe differently the pictures seen by them under similar circumstances, and even in such a way that they seem to have little to do with the events of their past life, that does not contradict what has been said, for the pictures which arise in the quiet, abnormal condition during the separation from the physical body are sometimes at first sight unintelligible in their relation to life. Correct observation, however, would always recognize this relationship. Neither is it an objection if, for example, someone who was once on the point of drowning did not experience what has been described, for it must be borne in mind that this can happen only when the etheric body is really separated from the physical body. I do want to note that on none of the experiences of my outer body have I seen my life. None of them. I have had 3 of those. I relayed 2 of those. I've had 2 out-of-body experiences that were not related to trauma. None of them had me visualizing, seeing anything from my past life. It was a current situation of me seeing me. Maybe I wasn't close enough to death. Right? That is an entire possibility. When, moreover, the former is still united with the astral body. If, through the fright, a loosening of the etheric and astral bodies also takes place, the experience is not forthcoming because then complete unconsciousness ensues and a dreamless sleep. Immediately after death, the events of the past appear as though compressed by the memory into a picture. After its separation from the etheric body, the astral body pursues its further wanderings alone. It is not difficult to realize that everything continues to exist, which, by means of its activity, the astral body has made its own during its sojourn in the physical body. The ego has, to a certain extent, elaborated the spirit self, the life spirit, and the spirit man. As far as these are developed, they do not owe their existence to the organs present in the different bodies, but to the ego, and it is precisely this ego which needs no outer organs for perception. Nor does it require any such organs in order to retain possession of what it has made one with itself. It might be objected, why then is there no perception during sleep of the developed spirit self, life spirit, and spirit man? For this reason, that the ego is chained to the physical body between birth and death, even though, during sleep, it is out of the physical body with the astral body, it nevertheless remains closely connected with the physical body, for the activity of the astral body is directed towards the physical body. On this account, the ego is relegated to the outer world of sense for its observations and cannot receive spiritual revelations in their direct form. Not until death do these revelations come within reach of the ego, because by means of death the ego is freed from its connection with the physical and etheric bodies. Another world may flash upon the consciousness the moment it is withdrawn from the physical world, which, during life, monopolizes its activity. Now, there are reasons why, even at this juncture, all connection with the outer physical world of sense does not cease for man. That is to say, certain desires remain which sustain the connection, There are desires which man creates just because of his consciousness of his ego as the fourth principle of his being. These desires and wishes, springing from the existence of his three lower bodies, can operate only in the external world and cease to operate when these bodies are cast aside. Hunger is caused by the external body. As soon as that external body is no longer connected with the ego, hunger ceases. Now, had the ego no further desires than those springing from its own spiritual nature, it might, at death, draw full satisfaction from the spiritual world into which it is transplanted. But life has given it other desires as well. It has kindled in it a longing for pleasures only to be enjoyed by means of physical organs, although these pleasures themselves do not originate in the nature of these organs. It is not only the three bodies which demand gratification from the physical world, but the ego itself finds pleasures in that world, for the enjoyment of which there exists no means whatever in the spiritual world. This is one of those places where it is appropriate to point out that there is a balance between all of the virtues and vices. Part of the playlist is the virtues and the vices, the 7 facets of God, and the virtues and the vices are both facets of God, right? There are coins, 2 sides of the same thing. Love and wrath is one coin. Lust and chastity is another coin. Gluttony and temperance, another coin. There is a balance to be stricken between all of these, and these pleasures that he's talking about with the physical organs, that naturally lends itself towards flesh, but it's also taste and smell and all of that as well. And your 3 bodies do demand gratification and should receive it. There is a time for abstinence from everything, right? Whether that is food or conversation. There is a time for abstinence from sex, but it is not all of the time. Almost no one is actually called to a life of not having sex. There are some vanishingly small amounts of people who are, like there are vanishingly small amounts of people who are called to multiple partners. That is a very, very tiny piece of the population. It is almost certainly not going to be you. You are meant to have physical gratification of your sexual needs, but not all of the time. Right? You're not meant to have sex 24 hours a day, but it's okay to have sex in an appropriate manner with an appropriate partner, right? That is gratifying your physical organs, and it is one of the reasons why you are here, right? Quite literally, if you believe in the Bible, you have to believe that you are called to have sex, right? Anybody that is telling you that it is bad to have sex is telling you directly non-biblical things, even if it is contained within the Bible. Right? Literally, what was the command to Noah? Go forth, repopulate the earth and subdue it. Be stewards thereof. You don't repopulate the earth by being sexually pure. Right? That doesn't mean throw your shit around to everyone, but it does mean that you are supposed to share it with someone. Right? The mingling of 2 souls create a new life. Sexual intercourse is the mingling of souls. Be careful who you mingle your souls with, but you are supposed to mingle your souls. That is part of growth. That is part of the experience. Just as much as, like, abstaining from sex for the entirety of your life is spiritually incomplete. Just as much as never taking alcohol is spiritually incomplete. That doesn't mean that you should be drinking every day, but it is okay to have a drink every once in a while. And if you think that it's not, you're probably imbalanced. And so there are physical needs that need to be met. Some of those are sexual, some of them are not. Right? If you are abstaining from something because you think it is going to make you more spiritual, you are almost certainly wrong. Like, you couldn't even begin the Kabbalah unless you were 35 years old and married with kids and able to provide for yourself with a solid foundation of a job, much like Masonry. Back to the text. During life, the ego has 2 kinds of desires, those that spring from the bodies and must therefore be gratified within the bodies, but which must also come to an end with their disintegration, and those that arise from the spiritual nature of the ego. As long as the ego lives in the bodies, these cravings are satisfied by means of the bodily organs. For in the manifestations of the bodily organs, the hidden spiritual element is at work. Remember I just said you were sharing your soul? And the senses receive something spiritual as well, in everything of which they are cognizant. I'm going to tell you something that people may not realize, and it is only tangentially related to this. There is a DNA exchange that happens whenever there is a sexual transmission, and you may realize that on one level, right? Yes, children come from this Congress. That is a DNA exchange. But when you inseminate a woman as a man, you give them some of your DNA, and it fundamentally changes their DNA. Not just for the child, but them, their self. They are changed by the sexual Congress. Now, that is assuming there are no prophylactics in the way, right? But even then, there is still an energetic exchange that happens. The same thing happens for men, but it has not been studied. I do not have any scientific basis for this, but it is one of those correspondences that actually do have a little bit of credence. If it stands to reason that sexual Congress will change one person's DNA, it does stand to reason that there will be a reciprocal action. That means that your DNA as a male is probably changed as well. Now, the tangential part is you do receive something spiritual from the physical gratification of sex. Now, with women, it has been studied. It is not just a gestational thing, right? Even if they never get pregnant, their DNA does change from sexual Congress. This is an established thing. It is something that we do know is real. We don't know the reciprocal, but I do believe that that is true. If it happens for one, it is reasonable to assume that it happens for another. And so, at least one of you is getting something on a spiritual level, because what makes you you is a spiritual thing. And if that is being altered in any way, then it is having consequences. And I do that, and if you don't know what that means, refer back to 2020, where there was definitely a DNA alteration being preferred by many people and pushed on those who refused it. Back to the text. And if you don't know that that was a actual physical transformation of your DNA because of the exact processes, I suggest you fall back to the alternatives, which I don't promote as much anymore, but on BitChute and Rumble, I have several videos that cannot live here on YouTube, where I went into the science behind that, the people who actually invented that particular technology, and told you in no uncertain terms that the entire creation of it was to alter DNA. Jennifer Dowda. Look that up in association with my name and you will find it. It is in the part, like all of those videos begin with, wait, what did say? That spiritual element is also present after death, although in a different form. Everything spiritual that the ego longs for while in the world of sense, it still possesses when the senses are no longer there. Now, if a third kind of wish were not added to these two, death would mean only a transition from desires which may be satisfied through the senses to such as are fulfilled by the revelation of the spiritual world. The third kind of desire is that which is created by the ego during life in the sense world, because it finds pleasure in that world, even when no spiritual element is revealed in it. The humblest pleasures may be manifestations of the spirit. The satisfaction afforded a starving creature by taking food is a manifestation of the spirit. For by taking food, something is thereupon brought about without which, in a certain sense, the spiritual nature could not develop. But the ego can go beyond the pleasure, which, in this case, is the outcome of necessity. It may even long for the delicious food quite apart from the service rendered to the spirit by taking nourishment. It is the same with other things in the sense world. Desires are created in this way which would never have appeared in the sense world if the human ego had not been incorporated in it. Neither do such desires arise from the spiritual nature of the ego. The ego must have pleasures of the senses as long as it lives in the body, even though it may be for the very reason that its own nature is spiritual. For the spirit manifests in material things, and the ego is enjoying nothing less than spirit when it surrenders itself to that element in the sense world, which is irradiated by the light of the spirit. Moreover, it will continue to enjoy this light even when the senses are no longer the medium through which the spiritual rays pass. But there is no fulfillment possible in the spiritual world for desires in which the spirit is not living, even in the world of the senses. When death takes place, the possibility of gratifying desires of this description is cut off. Pleasure in good things to eat can be induced only by the presence of the physical organs required for their consumption, the palate, tongue, and so forth. But when man has laid aside his physical body, he no longer possesses these organs. If, however, the ego still craves that kind of pleasure, the craving must remain unsatisfied. As long as this pleasure corresponds to the spiritual need, it is caused only by the presence of the physical organs, but it should happen that the ego has created the desire without serving the spirit in so doing. It retains it after death in the form of a craving, which thirsts in vain for gratification. We can form an idea of what man then experiences only by imagining someone suffering from burning thirst in a region where, far and wide, there is no water to be found. This is the predicament of the ego after death, as long as it retains ungratified desires for the pleasure of the outer world, and has no organs by means of which to satisfy them. Of course, the burning thirst, serving as a comparison for the condition of the ego after death, must be thought of as enormously increased, and it must be imagined as extending to all desires still existing, for which all possibility of gratification is lacking. The next condition of the ego consists in freeing itself from this bond of attraction to the outer world. With regard to this world, it has to attain purification and liberation. It must be cleansed of all wishes which it has created while in the body, and which have no native rights in the spiritual world. As an object is caught and burned up by fire, so is the world of desire, described above, broken up and destroyed after death. A vista is then opened up into that world which occult science calls the consuming fire of the spirit. This fire seizes upon desires of a sensual nature which, however, are not rooted in the spirit. Revelations of this kind, which occult science is bound to make with regard to such events, may appear hopeless and terrible. It may seem a fearful thing that a hope, for the realization of which sense organs are required, should, after death, be transformed into despair, and that a wish that can be fulfilled only by the physical world should be changed into torturing deprivation. Yet, we can hold such an opinion only as long as we fail to realize that the wishes and desires seized by the consuming fire after death do not, in a higher sense, represent forces beneficial to life but destructive to it. By means of these forces, the ego binds itself to the sense world more closely than is necessary in order to draw from it all of the experience it requires. For the sense world is a manifestation of the hidden and spiritual world, which lies behind it, and the ego could never attain spiritual happiness through the bodily senses, which are the only form in which the spiritual can be manifested unless it utilize the senses to seek the spiritual element in sense experience. Nevertheless, the ego loses sight of the true spiritual reality in the physical world to such an extent that it experiences sensual desires irrespective of the needs of the spirit. If sense pleasure, as the expression of the spirit, serves to raise and develop the ego, any pleasure which is not an expression of the spirit warps and impoverishes it. Even though such a desire finds the means of its gratification in the sense world, still its destructive effect upon the ego is thereby in no way diminished. but it is not until after death that its disastrous effects become apparent. For this reason, a man may, by gratifying such desires, create, during his life, new and similar desires, wholly unaware that he is enveloping himself in a consuming fire. What becomes visible to him after death is only what has already surrounded him during his life, and by thus becoming visible, it at once appears in its salutary and beneficent effect. A human being who loves another is certainly not attracted merely by that part of him which is perceptible to the physical senses, the only part which is cut off from observation after death. But after death, just that part of the dear one then becomes visible, for the perception of which the physical organs were the only means. The one thing, in fact, which would prevent a man from beholding his friend clearly is the presence of desires which can be satisfied only by means of physical organs. Unless these desires are extinguished, he can have no conscious perception of his friend after death. When looked at in this light, the terrible and hopeless character which after death experiences might assume for man, according to the descriptions given by occult science, become changed into one which is thoroughly satisfying and consoling. Now, the first after-death experiences differ entirely in yet another respect from those during life. During the time of purification, man lives, as it were, backwards. He lives over again the whole span of his life since birth, beginning with the events immediately preceding his death and reversing the order of his experiences. He goes through them again until he reaches back to childhood. In this process, he sees with spiritually enlightened eyes all those things which were not inspired by the spiritual nature of the ego, with the difference that he now experiences these things in reverse order. For instance, a man who died in his 60th year and who, at the age of 40, had, in an outburst of anger, caused someone either physical or mental pain, will go through this experience again when, on the return journey of existence after death, he reaches that point in his 40th year. But now he does not experience the satisfaction his attack had afforded him during life. Instead, he experiences the pain which he inflicted upon the other man. It may at once be seen, however, that whatever pain he feels in the after-death experience is caused by a desire of the ego arising only from the outer physical world. In reality, the ego does not only injure another by the indulgence of such a desire, but it also injures itself, although the injury to itself is not apparent during life. I am in accordance with this at least to a small degree. Now, whether or not the recollection is in exact chronological reverse order, no clue, right? Not at all. I do, however, believe that there is an understanding that is reached about your physical plane when you return to eternity. Your soul is eternal. That is something that is fairly universal in most of the religious systems. Where it came from, that's up for debate in several of them. Where it's going is definitely up for debate. But the fact that there is a soul and that it is eternal is one of the things that most people agree on, even though it is still in the realm of speculation. My belief on this is that it is eternal and it came from the exact same place that it is going to return to. Now, I know that is a somewhat unconventional belief, but if you believe in hell, then you haven't read the Old Testament, because there is no hell in the Old Testament. If you believe in heaven, you haven't read the Old Testament, because there is no heaven in the Old Testament. Not in the that's where your soul is going to go and be judged and get to celebrate and sing praises for the rest of eternity. That is not what is described at all in the Old Testament anywhere. There is the realm where God lives, and that is eternity. And there is the realm of the dead where people go when they die, but that is not a condemnation nor a pleasure. It is simply non-existence. That was the Old Testament in its entirety. I believe differently. I have unconventional beliefs, and that is in part because of the spiritual experiences that I have already had, right? I relayed my near-death experiences. I've relayed my out-of-body experiences in other places, but one of those experiences, I was pulled out of my body and I got to witness creation. I saw the unfolding of all of the planets and stars and all of the cohesion that came from God saying, I am the light, and becoming the change and the spirit and the logos. I witnessed that. Now, that was a purely spiritual experience. I can relay it. I cannot give it. But because of that experience, and part of that experience was the interconnectedness of all things. There is nothing that occurs that you are part of that is not important somewhere farther along. And sometimes we don't know that in the current situation, right? Heartbreak when you are a teenager is intrinsic to being able to love appropriately as an adult. Right? These things you don't realize at the time, but they are important to the overall progress. You making mistakes with this relationship leads you to not making the mistakes in a greater relationship. And that comes through understanding of the past experiences. I believe that when we pass on, we go right back into eternity. How that unfolds in particular is not all that vitally important to me, but I do believe that we return to God, and that is the source. God has individualized your soul for your body, for this particular experience. And part of that experience includes both positive and negative things. When we die, we get the understanding of what all of those things were. And for me, my understanding is that it is fairly immediate, right? This understanding that we are receiving from this book is that it is a journey that you make on the other side in a reverse chronological order. I don't necessarily believe that part of it, but I do believe that you get to learn things, right? And part of that is the understanding that this heartbreak in this relationship led to greater understanding in this one. This terrible situation here actually unfolded this beautiful thing that happened later. All things are interconnected, and we don't always see that. But when we die, we get to see that. We get to see where we made the mistakes and where we got it right. And then we have the choice to come back and try to learn again. Now, whether that is the same incarnation through a different lens or a completely separate incarnation, up for debate. Not that important to me, right? To me, this experience is the important one. Making sure that I am energetically aligned with Creator and Source is vitally important for me. Making sure that I understand that even the hard parts are a necessity, right? If you are unfamiliar with me, right, you stumbled across this video and somehow managed to make it this far in, I've got a video, the origin story, right, a playlist where I talk about where I came from, and it was pretty rough, right? Drug abuse and addiction, physical abuse, mental abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. I've been abused in most of the ways. I have, through spiritual revelation and contemplation, been able to understand those things. That is on the mortal coil, right? Even the most horrible things that you can possibly imagine, right? And those happened to me. And I can understand the spiritual growth that was supposed to happen and didn't, the choices that were supposed to happen and didn't because of free will. And I can see the growth that happened to me because of those things. The most recent example is my neighbor attacked me and my leg was broken, right? April 28th of this year. I have been able to pull experiences from that most people would not, right? Most people would not learn to find the gratitude of having a support system, right? It was a fundamentally breaking thing to my ego to have to ask for help. And it was something that was necessary for my spiritual development. And in order to enact that, my leg got broken and I was unable to help myself. You can take that in a negative light and you can run with it. This horrible thing happened to me. Or you can find the brighter side of it and you can decide, you know what, this terrible thing happened to me, but because of that, I have a new understanding. I have a greater appreciation for my wife and my children because of the way that they stepped up to take over the responsibility that I bear on a daily basis. I have a greater understanding and a greater empathy for people who have been attacked from other people. I've learned how to heal myself more effectively through this process. And I could dwell on the horrible parts of it. I was restricted to my house for 3 months. Right? I got out of my house 3 times in 3 months. I can look at that as a terrible thing, or I can look at it as a growth opportunity. That is entirely up to me. And this is whenever you get back, whenever you return home, because this is not home. This is a temporary existence. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. This is temporary. That is home. And when you return home, then you learn about all the lessons that you picked up here, or you didn't. All right, I'm going to try to get through just a little bit more before we wrap up. See if there's a natural stopping place. We're at an hour, so we're close already, but back to the text. After death. After death, however, the whole of the harmful world of desires becomes visible to the ego, which then feels attracted towards every being or object which had kindled the desire, in order that this may be destroyed in the consuming fire by the same means that created it. When man, on his return journey, reaches the moment of his birth, then only have all such desires been purged in the purifying flames, and henceforth nothing remains to hinder him from devoting himself entirely to the spiritual world. He enters upon a new phase of existence, in the same way that he laid aside his physical body at death, and soon afterwards his etheric body. So does that part of his astral body dissolve which can only live in the consciousness of the outer physical world. Occult science therefore recognizes three corpses: the physical, etheric, and astral. The period at which the last is cast off by man is marked by the time of purification, which amounts to about 1/3 of the time elapsed between birth and death. And why this is so can only be explained later, when the course of human life is examined from the standpoint of occult science. To clairvoyant observation, astral corpses which have been cast off by human beings passing from the state of purification into a higher existence are constantly visible in the world surrounding man, in exactly the same way that physical corpses in places inhabited by men are apparent to physical observation. And that is where we're going to wrap this up. This next part is after purification, an entirely new state of consciousness begins. That sounds like a good place to pick it up on tomorrow. And so that's going to bring us to the end of this particular part of the study of death in man. What happens after death? Well, there's still questions. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. Clarifying these things has kind of become my life's work, right? My mission in life is to try to be as clear, open, and honest about these things as possible. Relaying my experiences is one way of doing that, but I can't give you my experience. I can only tell you about it, and it is up to you whether you experience something similar or not. Those are decisions to be made by you. Clarifying these things to me is important, and this particular section is one of those where there's not a whole lot that I can clarify. I haven't died. I haven't been on that particular side of the death, or I've been close several times, but I've never actually been on the other side of no return, and so I cannot tell you what's on the other side completely. I had a spiritual experience. That does not necessarily mean that it was true or accurate. To me, it was. To me, it was vitally important. It was intrinsic to this understanding that led to this book. But that doesn't mean it was real. It can be completely within my mind. I can have confused myself. That is something that is intrinsic to remember as you do these things. Step into your power. Assume the authority for the things. Try to learn the lessons as you walk along. Reach the understanding. Rise to meet the challenges. Overcome and nurture your energies. Complete your harvest. Do the work, right? You are here for an experience, and that experience will be cut short. You will not welcome the day that you die. It might be today. It might be 40 years from now. It might be 100 years from now. You might live longer than anybody has, but you will die. And that is a vitally important part of life. that we don't understand. We try, we work at it, we write many explanations, we relay many experiences, but we don't really know. Anybody that tells you that they absolutely know empirically what is going to happen is a liar. They are intending to deceive you, to sell you a line. I tell you that I think I know. I tell you that I have a good guess. I do not tell you that I do know. I tell you that these things have worked for me, and this is the revelation that I have received in the manner in which I received it, with the conditionals that I received it with. Right? I try to be as clear and open and honest, but they are all speculative until they have been replicated. That is something that I maintain, despite the fact that I've written a book where I am telling people literally how I did it. Right? I am saying these are the things that I believe. This is the path that I have taken, both to enlightenment and the physical manipulation of the electromagnetic forces of creation. Literally doing magic. You don't have to believe me. I believe me. You don't have to follow me. You don't have to trust me. I don't ask you to. If you want to, you are more than welcome to put it to the test. See if it works. I have provided the resources. They're available free, or you can pay for them. If you pay for them, you get them in a condensed version. If you want to get it for free, you're going to have to work for it. Either way, it's going to require an investment from you. And if you don't have the belief, that's fine. You can call me whatever you want. I am fine with that. If I'm doing this in the public, I have to be okay with being called crazy. The things that I believe are outside of the realm of the normal, because I have had experiences outside of the realm of the normal. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated. Put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have a different work that you would like to see, I am planning on getting away from the esoterica, but if there is more to do, I will do more before we do that. So if there is a recommendation that you have, drop it in the box. I do plan on pivoting towards the psychoanalyst side of things. That is part of what I do over here. I have reworked the MBTI system. That is in here too. Self-growth and helping, understanding the psyche, intricately involved. Working through the shadow, intricately involved. Now, I'm not going to go to Sigmund Freud because I consider him to be somewhat of an idiot. Many of the things that he has said is completely just stupid, right? Blaming everything upon your sexual want of your mother is saying a lot about you, sir, but it is saying absolutely nothing about me. Jung, however, despite the fact that he was dismissed by many as pseudo-intellectual, actually provides many more insights into the actual human psyche than Sigmund Freud ever thought about. And so, I do anticipate a deep dive into Jung. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.